Hello and welcome to What's Trending with Tire Review. My name is David. I am the editor for Tire Review.
And I'm Christian, associate editor for Tire Review.
What's up, Christian?
Not much. What's going on with you?
Not a lot. I was wondering, though, if I could have your computer password.
Oh, no, I don't think so. That's a little personal, but I appreciate you asking.
Okay, well, you passed the test.
Oh, okay,
Because
good.
Today we are talking about data security.
Oh, okay.
Specifically, data security for tire dealers.
Okay.
Obviously, tire dealers are holding on to a lot of very sensitive,
Yes.
potentially vulnerable data,
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to their customers and what they're selling, things
Right.
like that. You don't want that data getting into the wrong hands or being held ransom or
Right.
something like that. So it's very important that tire dealers have all of their data locked down.
Yeah, right.
So today we are speaking with two guests from Torqata. That is AJ Pryor, the Chief Technical Officer, and Tim Eisenmann, the CEO of Torqata.
Awesome.
to the
Okay.
interview?
Yeah, let's get to it.
Let's do it. Tim, AJ, thank you both very much for joining us here today. I want to start with this question. What are some of the most sensitive data points that you feel tire dealers might have, in their systems at their shops? Tim, can we start with you?
For sure. So tire dealers actually handle a wide range of sensitive data. Think about all the customers that show up at the shops every day, right? They pay, they give you their address, their email address, their phone number, in some cases, any sort of identification around the vehicle. So I would say that's probably the most sensitive data, the customer's data, right? In addition, there's some internal data, inventory level, sellout data, basically data that's being generated by running the business. Those are sensitive as well, specifically to competitors. You don't want the person, 2-3 blocks down the road know what your sellout mix looks like and so on. That could put you in a disadvantage. So customer data and then company internal operations data, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. That totally makes sense. And AJ, what are some of the most common cyber attacks that you've seen, against that sort of data where people are, targeting those specific data points?
Yeah, well, there's a number. So in modern times, you see an increasing shift towards shop management systems that are web-based. And that's a divergence from the more traditional model of maybe it was sort of a server under your desk, which kind of includes that the data might live there. And that opens you up to essentially the whole family of cyber attacks and threats that are part of running web applications. So everything from cross-site scripting and cross-site request forgery. And so these kinds of things that you can mitigate how through training, things like being aware of phishing emails and so on. This is exactly a crossover to how we might protect data in a web-based environment. And we shouldn't be necessarily afraid of this shift because it also, in many cases, makes things more secure. We're offloading data storage, for instance, in many cases to cloud partners, and they have a great deal of infrastructure and processes in there to ensure strong, responsible data governance. But it's an evolution. I'd say the other category that is particularly problematic, and I don't see it going away anytime soon, is ransomware. And frankly, ransomware often is a vulnerability exploited through, again, phishing. It's a human error, if you'll call that. Somebody who has keys to your castle, whether maliciously or not, hands them to somebody else who then takes your data and will try to effectively extort you for it by holding it ransom. And these can be business halting, really deeply impactful, and frankly, hard to completely protect yourself against because they just exploit human nature.
Yeah, sure. And in your experience, do you find that it is these web-based kind of applications, is that easier for somebody to kind of hack into, break into to get this data, or is it an apples to apples comparison? Is it something completely different?
It is different. So, your mileage may vary, but one of the things that you should expect is that the moment something is on the internet, it means that people can come kind of knocking on your door. And if you have the right technologies and scanners and sniffers in place, you'll see that. Now, hopefully you've got, a security gate and a number of checkpoints and all kinds of passwords and multi-factor authentications to keep whatever's behind your gate secure, you will see those people knocking, and that comes in the form of sort of malicious scans, as we might call them, where typically what happens is the attackers are often not looking for a way into a specific organization. Rather, they have an exploit and they're just scanning the world to see who may have left the side door open. And then they go in and poke around and see if there's anything interesting there. So thus, it's really critical that you have a baseline minimum of security competency here, which again, you can benefit from by simply using trusted third-party partners. And that's why, and we might discuss this in a bit, data evaluations and risk assessments are an unavoidable and crucial part of modern data governance and practices. But by doing so, you can ensure that you've got the latest and greatest, and you're therefore protected against this, unfortunately, growing sea of potential vulnerabilities and exploits.
AJ, you seem to really answer a lot of maybe the question that I had, but I'd be interested to sort of know specific technological advancements that some tire dealers are taking on that makes them more susceptible to cyber attacks. And Tim, I'd love to hear from you too.
Sure. Maybe I can start, and then AJ,
Sure.
you add to it. Well, I think about number one, the data that's being generated and the access points for it, right? I mean, we're seeing tire dealers, automotive shops put more technology in their garages, right? Whether that's digital vehicle inspection tools, TPMS sensors, any sort of tracking devices, RFID tags and whatnot, right? The manufacturers are starting to bring into the tire, into the cars as well, right? Or the shop owners bring it to the shops themselves. And so more access points, I think, just means more risk overall. And then I would say, secondly, what we've also seen is a proliferation of software and technology tools, right, that require data. So they might tap into your shop management system. They might tap into your CRM. And so in some cases, that data then gets replicated and doesn't only sit in one place, but sits in multiple places. And now you don't have to secure just one part of your business, but multiple ones, right? So that just increases the complexity, I would say. AJ, what would you add?
I would agree with that. And again, it's often the implications of shifting into A, cloud, and B, moving away from what I'll call shared account models. Meaning these days you can log into anything with Google or with Facebook or whatnot, and gone or decreasing are the days of, well, there's one master computer in the shop and everybody kind of logs into that. So in the sort of everything's in your shop model, the kinds of problems you can run into are often created by the fact that we might not all be IT experts setting these things up. It can be as innocent and simple as, I'm running my shop and one day I'm sick at home and I want to set up a remote desktop so I can check in on something. That means you have to open up something, a port, access into your company. If you don't do that right, next thing you know, the fact that you've perhaps left a default password in place that you didn't think was going to be ever an issue, because I'm only ever touching this in my shop, means somebody gets in and has access to all of your information. Mm-hmm. Now, as we move into the cloud, we can benefit again from the protections we might get from offloading to managed service providers. I'm storing my data in Google Cloud, or I'm using a shop management system that does all that for me, and I'm just logging into a web browser. But now I got to make sure that I'm protecting how I actually get into that tool, which means my login credentials and having strong passwords and changing those frequently enough, and having that two-factor authentication. So you get the annoying text you have to enter the code in, and you shouldn't be annoyed by that because that's what's keeping you safe, frankly, and keeping your business secure.
Sure. And I have definitely been guilty of being annoyed by that, but I have to remind myself that it's for my own good.
Right.
Tim, I wanted to follow up with something you had mentioned. More access points equals more risk, which I think is a great point. But a question I have on that, so we're seeing the shop equipment come into shops nowadays more and more often where, they're connected to the cloud. Maybe it's not, a tire changer might have a computer-based module on it, but it's not necessarily like a a typical desktop computer. Would you say that that sort of equipment is just as much at risk as your normal typical desktop computer that you're going to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, honestly, if someone is looking for vulnerabilities in your shop, they're not necessarily just drawn towards the like desktop PC or the laptop that we would initially think of. Now, you also got to think about some of these machines and the equipment in the shop, right? Like, what sort of data is being captured here, right? Does it capture like PII data? Is the VIN connected to like a threat depth measurement or whatnot, right? If it's just the measurement but not the VIN, doesn't really, it's not as important, I would say. If it is connected, probably more important. So I would say with some of these, more specific diagnostic devices and whatnot, I would say the amount of risk that you're exposed to is limited. With your desktop PC, you probably have all the kinks to the castle on that one. So there's just a big risk if that gets compromised.
Makes a lot of sense. So, AJ, how would you say, we're seeing this kind of a big trend where, connectivity and transparency and the supply chain, we want to be as transparent as possible. At the same time, we want to keep things as secure as possible. So how can a tire dealer walk that line to make sure that they're sharing what needs to be shared to the right people, but then also making sure that everything that they need is secure and they're not sharing too much?
Certainly. So first and foremost, the responsibility in data transmission arrangements almost always falls to the transmitter of the data, meaning the moment you as a retailer are looking to send your data somewhere else, you have a responsibility to make sure that you can trust where that's going, because that's your customer's data. That's sensitive information, whether it's PCI, PII, VIN associations, anything like that. Which is to say, you should be willing to request, credentials. What sort of compliance measures and security practices do you have in place? And any responsible data handling org is going to be able to produce those documents. Torqata does that, and we're no different from anybody else. And frankly, if they can't, it's a huge red flag, because we should be able to show you with a sort of third-party seal of approval, this is why we can be trusted, and this is how we will handle your data. Specifically, what are the kinds of practices you should be looking for there? These days, you should only be using secure transmission protocols. Now, the word secure here typically means encrypted. So you're not able to sort of see or sniff data as it is transmitted. So things like using SFTP or only accessing websites and uploads when you have the little lock on your browser because there's an SSL certificate, which means the data is transported in a secure and encrypted manner. It's making sure that you have, as I mentioned earlier, multi-factor authentication enabled behind any of your logins is another layer of security. And it's making sure that you feel comfortable and you know exactly where the data is to go and how it will be stored and how long it will be stored there. So data retention and persistence, you have to have a strong handle on all of these things. And then lastly, just general upkeep. Keep your software up to date. Install those updates, because the most common thing to be adjusted in those incremental software updates is bug and security fixes. The most glaring, perhaps, security vulnerability like that we've seen in arguably the last 10 years may have heard of was the Log4j incident. Now, there are many smaller ones that are still highly concerning, but as sort of a hyperbolic example, this was a vulnerability where if you were running the version of this library, your system could be potentially completely taken over. And it might not have even been something that you knew you were using. You might have been referencing a software that pulled it in. And hackers are not going to wait around for you to patch your system. So what you can do is make sure you check for updates and keep everything nice and tidy, and you're in a safer, more secure place.
I could add to that. I think overall, and for a lot of the stakeholders in our industry, cybersecurity and data protection seems really scary, foreign maybe. Definitely not something you want to read about. After you've just worked for 10 hours in your shop. So I think these small examples of how you can establish baseline security, like updating your software, like actually having secure passwords, like leaning into multi-factor authentication, that already probably puts you above the majority of competitors and our peers. And so I think if folks walk away with one message from today, it is do these basic items, and you don't really need to get a PhD in computer science in order to do that. So it's an easy way to, I think, establish a baseline of protection.
You guys talked about specifics in terms of baselines or even maybe certain sites that can use software to help decide. Are there any industry-specific standards or even industry-specific certifications that tire dealers can show their customers, that they can help their customers gain some confidence, and they can show and say, I'm a good custodian of this data, of your data, and here's why? Is there anything that they can show that proves that to their customers?
Yeah, there absolutely are. So the starting a little more broadly, if you look at something like NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, it's a collection of practices and things of which to be aware for how you actually approach your data governance and security. But since you asked specifically about the automotive aftermarket, Auto ISEC, that's the Automotive Information Sharing and Analysis Center, and ISEC in general is a type of certification that brings you into the fold of having these modern best practices, and then Auto just tailors it to the kinds of data and the kinds of technologies and the way they're positioned that that entities in our industry would experience. So Auto ISEC is the first place that I would go. Okay. And then lastly, this is more of a partnership one, but you will hear often about SOC 2, which is something that you should expect to receive from any kind of partner who might be handling your data. So as a retailer, your customers may not expect you to have that, but if you're looking for any kind of third-party data integrations, you should request that essentially always.
Got it.
And maybe just to shed a little bit of light as to what SOC 2 is, it basically means that best practices are followed to protect your data. So those best practices mean that we know exactly who has access to which pieces of data. We rotate our passwords consistently. We've got material onboarding and offboarding, so that if an employee of a software company leaves the company, all access credentials are revoked and that's audited and so on. So it's a pretty ambitious certification, I would say, but definitely one that I would look for when interacting with, say, like a data broker or anyone that wants to integrate within your system. It is the gold standard, I would say, not just in automotive, but for data companies at large.
Gotcha.
Great. Tim, you've made the point already here that, after a long day at the shop, maybe you've been there for 10, 12 hours. The last thing you really want to do is, try to read up and study data security. So for anyone listening to this podcast here who might own their own tire business, what is an actionable step, an easy step that they can take right now to improve their security, maybe tenfold?
Yeah. Well, I'd say number one, update your software. Number two, do you know who has access to which data at your shop, right? Do a little audit there. And then thirdly, I would say, what are the software providers that we are running in our shop, and do I actually know what sort of data they're pulling or not? So I would say the first step really is awareness, and then updating your current software and making sure your passwords are safe.
Gotcha. Love it. Well, Tim, AJ, thank you guys so much, both of you, for joining us here today. I know I've learned a lot. This is a huge topic. I mean, this is something where, if you are susceptible to ransomware, it could really, really, really do some real damage on your business. So, and not just ransomware, of course, anything in the kind of digital data realm. So, really appreciate your tips here. This is fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. This is a big help.
You're most welcome. Take care.
Absolutely.
See ya.
Okay, that was some real stuff there.
Right.
What'd you learn?
The number one thing I learned is it's not too hard to get updated on your cybersecurity. So if you want to, it's as simple as updating some software, updating passwords, training your techs, or just training employees in general.
Yeah.
I think that's the most important thing is it's not hard if you want to get it fixed.
Yeah. I mean, there are those basic steps that they were
Right.
talking about, right? You can go into more in-depth things
Right.
that you can do, but at the end of the day, there are some real basic things that can really upgrade your
Sure.
security.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point.
Right.
Another point that Tim had mentioned was the fact that the more kind of open points that you have in your shop, whether that be a desktop computer, a laptop computer, or shop equipment just sitting in your shop base, each of those points is an opportunity for somebody to access your data. So you need to make sure that you are locked down. Working with a partner can really help you do something like that and make sure that you have kind of, dotted your I's, crossed your T's, make sure that everything is kind of wrapped up the way that you need it to be as secure as possible.
Great. Yeah, I'm really glad we talked to them. I think we learned a lot, and I think our viewers will too.
Yeah, one thing, I'm going to have to review some of those different letters and numbers that they were throwing out there. That was a lot, and I think that we could all kind of do our homework and kind of learn more about some of these associations and things, because some of those were news to me, and it'd be good to just know more about them and how they can help improve security.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, thank you for joining me today, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next time.
See you guys.